So what I was going to share today is some of my own experiences in terms of I've had the experience of working in several different software companies and building different kinds of products, ranging mostly in enterprise, less so much in consumer, although I did spend some time, but mostly in enterprise. And so I just wanted to share, what some of the things that have worked really well for me and some of the things that haven't worked, so that you can benefit from some of that experience. I'll take because given that we are in Medallia, how many of you know Medallia? Like who Medallia is, what do we do? So I'll probably spend a minute or two describing what the company is, because I wanted to use the example of some of our products to illustrate the various concepts. So what I wanted to cover today really is sort of like, what does it take to really build great products? And some principles in terms of there are four that I look at, and I want to go through that in detail a little. Okay, so to give you an idea of Medallia, we are an enterprise software company. We've been around for over 10 years now in the enterprise software as a service space. We are focused on customer experience management. How many of you know what customer experience management is? Okay, good, fair enough. All right. So the simplest way, if I were to describe this to my grandma, the simplest way to describe CEM is it's sort of like the flip side of CRM. So CRM helps companies sort of understand their customers, help them understand who they are, what they do, whose contract is coming up for renewal, who's been with me for so long, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about helping companies understand or manage the relationships with their customers. This is the flip side. This is about helping companies understand what customers think of them. Because what you think of them ultimately determines what you do with them. If you're happy with your customer experiences, you tend to do more business with those companies. So good cheese comes from happy cows, right? So you have happy companies with happy employees. They serve their customers better, and that's a vicious cycle. So we are in that space, helping companies sort of manage experiences with their customers, regardless of when, where, how, in what form it happens. So that's sort of the most generic way, and that's the extent to which I'll cover what Medallia is. We've been around for some time. It's a privately held company, and we're over 1,000 employees, and we're very proud to be here in Argentina. It's about you're going into year 6 now, right? If I remember correctly. Okay. A little bit about myself, my background, so that as I go through the various examples, you can try to relate some of the things that I say to the products that I will describe. So I'm an engineer by training. I went through graduate school. I got a PhD in supply chain management. And I worked in a variety of software companies, ranging from, I started out in supply chain management, at companies like IQ that got acquired, JDA and others. So these are supply chain. How many of you know supply chain management at a higher level? It's all about managing the logistics and distribution, about making sure the right products are at the right place at the right time, so that when you place an order, you have all the distribution, logistics, supply chain management happen to get the product to the right place. And then over time, I spend a lot of time looking also at product definition. How do you define products, the whole life cycle of product definition. And I was at Agile that got acquired by Oracle, and this was all about managing life cycle of products in a distributed environment. And then I was at SAP for many years, running their supply chain management products and their analytics products. And then at First Data, I almost forgot, focused on data analytics. So First Data is the largest payment network in the world. And so these are all data about, when you swipe a credit card or a debit card or any of these cards, they go through networks of companies like First Data before they hit Visa, MasterCard. And so when you look at payments data, you can tell a lot about what customers do, where they spend their money, what their attributes are, and there's a lot of very interesting analytics that they do. and now at Medallia, as I just talked about. So what did I learn from all of these experiences, which could be of interest to people like you? Like, how do you create products that people love to use, products that people have to use, they don't have a choice, and people need to use? And I've sort of seen products in all these three categories, where I would put Medallia in the category of where a product that people love to use, and SAP in the category that people have to use, and others in between. And the reason that it's important is sort of the characteristics of what you think about in designing, building, and launching these products are slightly different depending on the objectives that you're trying to solve. Then, how do you build products that scale to sort of millions of users? In enterprise, and again, all my experience is on the enterprise side, so I can't talk about the consumer side of the business. But even on the enterprise, you have companies serving millions of customers. So whether you're building a mobile app or whether you're building a web solution, how do you scale to millions of users? And millions of dollars as a result. So how do you build a scalable business that lasts? And build global teams, because increasingly as we build, shape, deliver these products, we've got distributed teams spread across various parts of the world. Like we have development here, development in the US, in Israel, in different places. How do you coordinate sort of product development in multiple geographies over the world? And then how do you build and scale these businesses? Like in some of these, I've had the opportunity to start from scratch and build the entire multi-million-dollar business. And in some cases, you're scaling out an existing business. And so I'll share some of these examples as I go through. So as I talked about, if you are sort of a product manager or in the business of building products, there are four things that you absolutely have to have a pretty clear view of. First is sort of like, as a product manager or somebody responsible for one or more product lines, you have to have a pretty clear vision in terms of what is the vision behind your product. And whether you're building companies, in some cases the entire company is one product. In some cases you have multiple products within a company. But it's extremely important to have a pretty clear vision. And I'll touch upon each of these in a second. And then, vision typically sort of stays the test of time. So you can't change your vision every day, right? So it's something that you core believe in. You inspire people around you, inspire people who work for you, people that you work for, etc. And something that lasts over time. Strategy, on the other hand, something that continuously has to change and evolve. As market conditions change, as your own internal conditions change when you grow from a startup to a mid-size to a large company, strategy has to be continuously refined. And then design, especially like, a product is incomplete without a proper design. And there are some core principles that govern like how you design products, whether it's going back to the philosophy of, are you trying to build a product that you want people to love and be sticky and drive a lot of engagement, or are you trying to build products that are mission critical, that cannot fail and always address a core part of your business, etc. Whatever the function is, you have to design accordingly for it. And finally, it's all about execution. You can have a great vision, you can have a great strategy, but if you're not executing day in, day out, not just individually, but product managers typically are sort of the nucleus around which a lot of teams revolve. And all the examples I'll be giving, obviously will come from the software industry, and so bear with me for that. But this would apply to lots of different industries, where the people building it, the people servicing it, the people selling it, they're all sort of very tightly dependent around a core nucleus that the product leaders represent. And so it's a big sort of like the clarity of thought and responsibility comes with it. So let's talk about vision. What exactly is a vision, and what's sort of like a good vision that you remember, you get inspired by, and something that stays with you for a while. So if you look at companies like Google as an example, I'll just take a few examples to convey a point. their vision was not to build the world's best search engine, because that's too tactical. That's sort of a tactical delivery at a point in time. They had a much larger, or they have a much larger vision in terms of like organizing the world's information. And that vision translates down into a whole portfolio of products, whether you're building a search engine, you're building maps, or you're building your mobile products, or you're looking at mapping the entire globe, et cetera, et cetera. And it's sort of that lasts the test of time. So this hasn't changed since the company has been founded. But look at another example, Facebook. Similarly, it's all about connecting people and being able to share with the people in your life. It was not about just building a social network. And so now if you see how the portfolio has evolved over time, they've added Instagram with pictures, they've added WhatsApp for messaging. It's all about continuously providing different forms, but the core theme around connecting people and being able to collaborate stays. Another one, my personal favorite, is Nike, as an example. Nowhere will you see that they're in the business of making shoes. They will never talk about it that way. It's all about the athlete. It's all about the athlete and how do you sort of harness the power of the athlete. And continuously, they're all about sort of like inspiring and providing the best possible, whether it's shoes or clothes or whatever. That's sort of like aiding the overall vision. And if you look at even companies like Medallia, like what is our vision? And our vision also hasn't changed since the day the company was founded. So it's about creating a company that where companies are loved by both their customers and their employees. And that's sort of like the overarching vision that drives every single product that we create. And there's a larger purpose that the products are trying to serve. And this is important, if you are in the product definition, creation, delivery business. It's very important to have a very clear, crystal thought that you not only come up with the vision, but communicating the vision and ensuring that you can rally people behind you and believe in that is absolutely critical to ensure the success of a product in the marketplace. And it's very, 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 very important. And this is something that you have to repeat over and over again. It's not like you've communicated your vision once to your team and it's enough, right? You have to constantly keep reminding, constantly keep iterating this over and over again until it sort of sinks in. And especially if you're like a founder, how many of you are sort of like in startups? Quite a few of you. And it's particularly important in companies that are sort of early in their life cycle, because every new employee that you're bringing in, every new customer that you're bringing in, you have to sort of reiterate your vision over and over and over again, because that's how you sort of build, a culture around it. So that's sort of number one. That's most important. Number two, which is often from a function perspective, I would say where product managers or product leaders spend majority of their time, because this is something that you have to continuously iterate on. How do you translate? Yeah, you've got a great, grandiose vision, but how do you translate that into something that you can, bring teams behind and start executing towards? And this is what often differentiates, companies with great products with sort of also ran products, if you will. And here, as I was saying earlier, it needs to be continuously iterated. Because what's most critical that makes or breaks any company or any product line is the product market fit. And that is something like, as a product leader, as a product manager, you always have to, that should keep you awake at night. That is something that you always focus your energies on to make sure that there's a very high product market fit with the market that you're trying to serve. And there are some core dimensions that you have to think about. So when you say like product market fit, what does that mean? I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. And you have to be like crystal clear about, for me, it has served very well. These are questions that I continuously keep coming back. I challenge my product managers, my product leaders to continuously keep coming back, whether you're building small features, whether you're building product, whether you're building portfolios of products or an entire company. You have to have a very deep understanding of some of these questions. Let's look at them in detail. So first and foremost, like, you need to know what problem you're solving. Like, are you a vitamin or are you a painkiller? You know, and I think it should be pretty obvious, like the meeting. Are you like a nice to have feature that if your customers have some discretionary additional money, they will purchase your product, versus are you like a painkiller where there is a very specific pain point that customers have and they cannot live without your product? It's very clear. I mean, it's very important to have that clear distinction in your mind, because people often have a false sense of reality in terms of, like, they may be thinking of themselves to be a painkiller, but they're actually a vitamin. You know, because you may think that what you're providing is sort of the best thing since sliced bread, but your customers may not view it that way. They might feel like, okay, fine, it's a cool little gizmo, cool little features, but, you know, can I live without it? Yeah, maybe. But then it's also not black and white. You know, some things may start out as a vitamin, but over time, you know, can become something that is sort of you cannot live without, or your customers cannot live without. So having that clarity of thought is very important. Number two is, like, who are you solving for? Like, who is your customer? And you have to have a very crystal clear view of, like, who your customer is, because, you know, and there again, like, you know, you have to have a clarity of thought between who your user is versus who's going to pay for it, or who's the end customer. And sometimes it could be the same person, sometimes it could be different. But understanding that, what market segment are you targeting? You know, again, I'll give you examples from the enterprise world. Are you solving for small businesses, or are you solving for, like, mid-market or extremely large enterprises? Because the strategies that you would deploy are going to be very, very different, and the feature functions that you're going to prioritize are going to be very different depending on, like, what segment of the market or what customer that you're targeting for. And then, like, most important is sort of like, what's your unique value proposition? Again, depending on whether you're a painkiller or you're a vitamin, like, what exactly is your value proposition? How are you different from others in the marketplace? What unique proposition do you have? What specific pain points of the customer do you solve? How are you different, et cetera, et cetera. Again, constructing that, being very crisp about it, being very eloquent about it is important. And then, you know, if you have a great idea and if you have a great sort of space that you're in, chances are you're not alone. Right? You know, there are other smart people who have thought about the same idea and are running as fast as you or faster to bring that product into marketplace. So having a clear sense of how are you going to win, how are you going to differentiate against your competitors? Is it going to be based on features? Is it going to be based on, you know, go-to-market model, or is it going to be based on price? You know, you have to have a very clear idea of how you're going to compete against the marketplace. And then, like, which dimensions are you going to call out? Like, if you want to differentiate again with your competitors and in the marketplace, what are your unique differentiators and that are addressing the value proposition that you're claiming that you may have? And seems to be going back. Let's cover this. Yeah. And then, what's your customer acquisition strategy? You know, again, whether you are building an app for consumers or whether you're building, you know, enterprise software for large or small companies, what's your customer acquisition strategy? How are you going to sign new customers? How are you going to retain them? Is it going to be services? Is it going to be subscription? Is it going to be license? You know, having a clear sense of what your go-to-market strategy is very important, because people, you know, a lot of startups run out of cash, run out of, you know, money, you know, because their cost of customer acquisition is way more than what's sustainable. So having a clear sense of that is fundamental. And then, you know, This is always a good thing to know. Although it hasn't prevented a lot of successful companies to be formed, where they have no idea how they're going to make money, focusing on users is enough, etc. But ultimately, like, how are you going to make money? What's your monetization model? Are you going to have a freemium model where you want to go after market share initially, and then you're going to have value-added functionality over time? Or are you going to have like user-based pricing, or are you going to have some other unit-based pricing, etc.? How are you going to make money? And how do you translate the value proposition into something that your customers will pay? And having a clear sense of price points, relative to your competitors, is very critical. And then having a core set of KPIs. The smaller, the better, right? Where core set of KPIs, is it going to be customer acquisition costs? Is it going to be market share? Is it going to be, profitability? And you can have different metrics at different stages of life in the product's life cycle, but having a very clear set of metrics, if you don't measure, then you won't monitor it, and that's very critical. And these were some of the 8 sort of core metric or core dimensions along which you continuously refine your strategy. And you don't have to differentiate in all of them. It's very hard for companies or products to excel at all of these. You have to have a very clear set. At any given point in time, you might sort of like pick a few of them that you're focusing on, that you're directing your investments on, saying that, okay, for this, now I'm going to focus on a particular segment of the market, and we're going to focus on differentiating, using a certain set of features. That's going to be our focus. A year later, 2 years later, your focus could be a little different, and you're focusing on some other set of dimensions. It's very, very important, like, that you cannot do all of these all the time, because you have, and especially if you're a startup or any company, regardless of size and shape, it has a limited set of resources that you have to invest intelligently towards. So identifying like which of these are you going to focus on when and at what point in life of the life cycle of the product is also one of the key decisions that product leaders, product managers have to make on an ongoing basis. So that addresses sort of like the strategy side of the house. So we covered like vision, then we covered sort of strategy in terms of like what are the things you need to be thinking about and focusing on. The third major dimension is design. And again, design, in how you approach the whole design thinking in terms of like realizing your vision into product varies greatly upon the type of, again, going back to what are your primary areas of focus? Are you trying to build a consumer app for market share, or are you trying to build an enterprise app? The design has to evolve accordingly. And there are a few things that I want to highlight. And design often is sort of like more sort of art than science. And you're sort of affecting the psychology of your users. Again, some products you're trying to establish an emotional connection with the users. In some, you're trying to drive addictive behavior. In some, you're trying to be extremely functional, where you want to address, what the job function of your end users are, and you want to be able to provide just the right set of information at the right time so that they don't over-engineer your products. So it's all about like the how, as opposed to like what, which is largely very functional. And let's take a few examples. So if you were to describe this in a nutshell, aim for like the simplest possible design that serves your need, that serves the purpose. Often we get enamored by bells and whistles and features and functions that you want to overload your product. What we constantly what I've constantly also challenged a lot of my product managers and designers is come up with sort of the simplest possible design that works, and something that can reinforce the value that it provides on an ongoing basis. The second thing in creating great designs is you have to know your personas really, really well. So this goes back to like who your target customer is, and knowing their persona, knowing how you want them to interact with your product, how you anticipate them to keep using your product, what their job functions are, what their pain points are, or what their value-added features are extremely, extremely important. So knowing sort of the personas, and if you take the example of Medallia, like, where there are a certain set of personas that we go after, like we go after, the frontline users. These are like the employees, whether you're a retail store or you're a contact center, call center rep, or people who interface with customers on an ongoing basis. And those are a key part of our user base. And then we have analyst users, we have sales and operations. For each of these, you have a different set of features, different set of functionality. You may even have a different product. You may have a different app that are just focused on a particular persona. So understanding the personas, which ones you're going to, some you may have to address just for completeness of vision, and some are ones that you primarily differentiate on. And understanding that is also very key to prioritize your investments. Then connecting emotionally. These days, the bar, the consumerization of the enterprise has raised the bar significantly. Like, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of enterprise software was very functional. If you did the job and you didn't crash and you were efficient and high performant, that usually was enough, because it was all about efficiency, it was all about productivity. That's no longer enough, because especially with the growth of mobile and all the consumerization that has happened, being able to emotionally connect with your user often becomes also a critical factor for a success or failure of your product line. And here, like, a couple of concepts have served me very well. And how many of you have come across, like, the book Hooked? If you haven't, I would strongly recommend everyone to read this book, because even though majority of the inspiration behind it comes from the consumer world, it's applicable to all types of products. And I'm a big fan of Mir. And what he talks about is sort of like the reinforcing loop, where how do you build products that become a habit, that become part of their daily life, so that it's the first thing that they do when they wake up and the last thing they do when before they sleep. And in fact, I'll take the example of Medallia in a second. Like, we have that situation. We have a lot of users where we are the first thing that they see in the morning and the last thing they check, before they go to sleep, because it's there are a core set of things that we do for if you're a retail store manager, or if you're a call center rep, or if you're a checkout agent at an airlines. They are constantly measured by the feedback they get from all of their customers, and they are constantly measured. They're constantly evaluated. They're rewarded based on that feedback that they get. Which is what we provide to them on an ongoing basis. And so if you think about, like, what the reinforcing loop that I talked about, first and foremost is to understand, like, what does the user really want? Like, having a clear understanding of persona, their function, what do they want, and both sort of like what is their intrinsic need and what do you want them to do in your app. Understand. I'll take an example, to describe this. And what action do you want them to take in your app? And and there's a notion of variable reward. Like, if your app continuously provides the same set of information day in, day out, the initial excitement dies down pretty quickly. So you have to have an element of surprise. You have to have an element of reward. Like, have a different insight or a different metric or a different dashboard on ongoing, mix things up so that there's an element of surprise that brings the users back and ties it back into, and you want them to sort of invest time and energy into your app itself. And that becomes sort of like an addictive loop. So if you take an example of, like, the most addictive product out there, Facebook. So if you see, like, what they do, and these principles you can carry over into any of your products that you build as well. So here, like, what's the internal need that they're solving? A lot of us And even though we have great social lives, a lot of us have lonely moments, or moments during the day when you're like trying to kill time in. And that's sort of like the intrinsic internal need that Facebook is addressing. But then the external trigger is around sort of notifications or triggers that are constantly sort of attracting the user into the application. And you're serving the internal need through those external triggers. Similarly, like in various applications, depending on the persona that you're addressing, having the right kind of external trigger to serve the internal need is very critical, because that's what will keep people coming back to your app on an ongoing basis. But once they're in, what do you want them to do? You want them to take actions in the app. And here, like a good example is like either they are creating content or sharing content or and so on. Similarly, like if depending upon a different app, you would have a different set of actions, whatever is your domain that you're focusing on. But then, like you want that to be reinforcing, so that there is sort of like an intrinsic reward by doing those actions, and it sort of reinforces over time. In the case of Facebook, as an example, like you post something and people are sort of like anxious until somebody likes it or somebody shares it, and you're constantly counting the number of likes or the number of shares and those types of things. And so that sort of like is mutually reinforcing, that builds the reward mechanism in your tool. In the example, from another domain, like where you're introducing a lot of gaming into your tools, where some of the things that we do, for example, are like comparisons, benchmarking, where you know that you got a certain rating, but like how do you compare against all other stores in the neighborhood? How do you compare against your competitors? And that keeps changing all the time. And so people are constantly sort of hooked into looking at that and the actions they take. How does that improve or affect their ratings or rewards? And you can think about that in various domains, to apply that into a mutually reinforced, so that ultimately you want them to do things that builds additional stickiness, where the more things they do in your app, the more they sort of like are hooked to it. And this becomes sort of a mutually reinforcing. We've applied a lot of these principles into our apps and products that we've built over time, so much so that if you look at the various sort of like, the apps that we monitor a lot that are most common, but I picked examples both from enterprise and consumer. We look at a ratio called habit ratio, which is a measure of like both how frequently do people come to your app and how engaged they are. So it's sort of the ratio between daily and monthly active users. And you see like we are pretty close to Facebook. So this is sort of like one of the most engaged app you can find in the enterprise space. And a lot of the principles I showed you earlier were sort of used to build this type of, and it's unheard of. Like, in enterprise, like, how often do people sign up into their CRM app or into their expense reporting app or something like that? Only when you need to. And so some of those principles can be applied into, and our engagement ratio is pretty astronomical compared to a lot of.
How do you measure that?
Continuously.
Okay, so you check how often people open the app daily.
So we monitor daily active users, monthly active users.
Sorry, how is it measured, the daily activity on something?
Yeah.
One question.
Yeah.
You classified your mobile app as something that your users love to use, or that they have to use?
Love to use.
Because
That's what you said.
Yeah. So this one.
This is because they love it, not because it's the only way that they have, because their nature of work makes it only available on the phone.
No, I mean they can go to the web app to look at these dashboards as well. And so in the mobile app, we intentionally built a lot of functionality around what I described earlier to make it into an addictive behavior. Because especially in the business that we are in, like customer experience, where it is very important that it's not the job of like one or two departments within the company. We want the entire company to be users of your solution, because ultimately, if you look at customer experience, it's not marketing responsibility or customer service responsibility, or ultimately it's the responsibility of the entire organization. And in some of our customers, we have over 100,000 users within the company, which is like all the way from CEO down to the frontline clerk. Everyone uses the app, and at various degrees of levels, but that's sort of like a core principle that we use. That's important for this space. Then, so we talked about vision, we talked about strategy, where you looked at, product market fit in the various dimensions. And then we talked about the importance of design and some of the principles behind design. The next thing I want to talk about is execution. And execution, again, is, to me, like, this is where sort of the rubber hits the road, where whether you are in, running agile scrum teams, or whether you're running, multiple of those teams, distributed or co-located, being able to have, like, run this on the execution, you can have, as I said earlier, you can have great concepts, great designs, great strategy, but without execution, none of this makes sense. And here, some of the things that have worked for us is, ultimately, like, if you think about a product manager or a product leader, they're an orchestrator. You are not the genesis of all the ideas. You just happen to orchestrate. Ideas and designs can come from a variety of your team members. Ultimately, your role is to make sure that collectively you produce great music. And you may not be the creator of all of these things. And so I'll just walk through some of the principles. Yeah, is, obviously, if you're in the product business, the definition, validation, and continuous refinement of requirements is sort of like, a table stakes. So that's something that you expect from every product manager or leader. If you're not good at that, then you probably have to revisit your career options. That is core fundamental. But then equally important is sort of discipline in execution. And what that comes with, whether you're, Agile is the predominant form, these days, in order to be able to iterate fast, in order to be able to execute and distribute. And I'm sure all of you are pretty well familiar with Agile methodologies. It's all about, like, continuously iterating, failing fast, validation, A/B testing, all the standard techniques that you apply. And these are, you can do this at a feature level, you can do this at feature group level, or at various whatever your scope is. And the focus is around MVP, minimum viable product. One of the traps that a lot of product managers, product leaders fall into is, let me just squeeze this one more feature in. Let me just, because this is like the coolest thing that we need to do. Having that discipline and execution is very important. Being honest to the teams, honest to the market, honest to the minimum viable product in terms of what you need. And this doesn't have to be something that's static. Continuously iterating on it. And then retrospectives. Retrospectives, at the end of every scrum, at the end of every cycle, having a very honest assessment of retrospectives, looking at what worked, what failed. A lot of teams, forget to do that. And as soon as they're done shipping one, they move on to the next site. This is one area that, like, I would say, I've gone through a lot of these myself, where it's very important to assess failures, assess and finally, like, measure and monitor. If you're not measuring and monitoring, then all of this is very subjective, and it's based on people's opinions, and the loudest person in the room, tries to get their thing across. So these are some of the things that are absolutely essential to drive. And then this is a continuous process. So as going all the way from hopefully the vision doesn't change on an ongoing basis, but the rest of it is an ongoing process, and product is in the center of the whole. And it's more important. What's extremely important is that you have fun along the way. Otherwise, all of this is becomes very routine and functional. So one other thing that I wanted to convey, if you look at career progression, this is again something that I use a lot to, coach and develop a lot of product managers in my teams, and has served me well over the years. I've had this model for over 15 years that I've been constantly using. And if you think about it, on one axis, you have, this is sort of like how a product manager's career progresses over time, regardless of where, what consumer or enterprise you're in. And what you see on the x-axis is sort of like features, feature groups, product, and portfolio of products. So that's sort of one dimension of growth, where you start out as, okay, I'm the product manager for a particular feature, then I grow to do a bunch of feature groups or the entire product, or I may have a portfolio of products. So that's clearly like one dimension that goes in. The other dimension is when you're junior. So let me just read this out for people in the fall. So it's problem, solution, how to do it, and execution. So when you're fairly junior in your career life, somebody defines the problem. Somebody even defines the solution. Somebody defines how to do it. Your job is to get it done, right? And so if you're like a junior product manager, you're somewhere here, where you're working on a feature, somebody has done all of this, and your job is to like execute on it. As you progress, then somebody's defining the problem and the solution. You have to figure out how to do it and get it done, right? And then as you grow up, or as you evolve, you are given a problem. You figure out how to solve it. You figure out how to do it and get it done. And by the time you become fairly senior, we expect you to come and tell me, or tell what problem to solve. Like, this is the problem to solve, and you have thought through how to solve it. You have thought through, the solution, how to solve it, and what teams or distributed teams does it get to get it done. And the progression actually looks something like this. It's actually a pretty steep curve once you go beyond a certain area. And often it's sort of like, for a product manager, it's important to be honest with themselves, to know exactly at any point in time, like, where are you in this curve, and where do you need to develop, and it's something that's served me very well, and I thought I would share it with you guys as well. Any questions here? Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. And last but not least, some things that overall, from a behavior perspective, I'll just fill this out so that, in terms of, what I covered so far was about the job function itself, in terms of what you need to do and in order to be. But there are also like traits, like human traits, that a good product manager, a good product leader has to exhibit to be really efficient, really successful in their career. First is what I call genuine concern, which means that you have to put yourself in the shoes of your customer. You have to put yourself. Lives of a lot of people are dependent on the decisions that you make, whether it's the customer, or whether it's the design team, or whether it's the engineering teams, and so you have to put yourself in their shoes and genuinely, have concern for the problem that you're solving. So, and that's very critical. Like, you can build a great product, but if the sales guy is having a really tough time selling it, it's the job of the product manager to go fix that problem. It can't be like, you go deal with it. Second is, like, you have to set a very high bar, where, this is needless to say. What's another thing that's very important is to sort of like say what you do and do what you say. This is particularly important as an organization scales, where the customers are dependent on your roadmap, the sales folks are dependent on your roadmap, and so having the discipline of like both clarity of vision, clarity of thought, and execution, where if you say something is going to come in at a certain point in time, then having the discipline to follow through is very, very important, especially as organizations scale out. This is a mistake a lot of product managers make, where they go listen to one customer and then want to build it out. Where in fact, what I often advise my product managers is listen to customers, but never build for. You have to build for the market, and having that distinction is it's sort of like an acquired skill, and this often differentiates sort of like great product managers from average product managers, where sometimes it's Apple, they must be right whatever they're saying, or it's Nordstrom, or it's this, where you get so carried away by, you're not, as a product manager, you're not building for one customer, you're building for a market. And otherwise, you will be in services, if you're trying to address the need of one particular customer. This is very, 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 very important, and often is, makes or breaks a lot of products. And lastly, it's sort of, given that you are the nucleus for a lot of things, it's always team first. Where if the team is not rallied behind your vision, if they're not bought into it, if you don't have the authority or to back up the prioritizations that you're saying, your team won't trust you. And so it's very, very important to establish that trust. So that was it. And hopefully